Tyler Boyd reports for off-season activities. That makes 87 out of 89 Bengals in attendance on Tuesday. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day, free and available on YouTube, where you can subscribe to this program, and anywhere you get your podcast, where you can also follow and be part of that first listen club, be part of that everyday group of listeners that may have heard the Billy Anderson interview earlier this week, the Mike Santagata breakdown of the Bengals rookies last week, the film takeaways. And today we're going to get into some more offseason program, offseason practice observations. The biggest one today, James, is that Tyler Boyd, number 3 of the big 3 of the Bengals wide receivers, although the first chronologically, was back in Cincinnati for practices. And that makes almost everybody outside of Jonah Williams, who's obviously not going to show up for anything optional. And who am I forgetting? There's an injured player who's not there.
Cheeto wasn't there today, but
Cheeto.
he's been there for a lot of it. He just wasn't on the field today. So he might have even been at the facility, but wasn't
That's
there
right.
on Tuesday.
But Tyler Boyd back out there running routes with all the Bengals receivers, meeting Charlie Jones perhaps for the first time. Do you know?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So a lot of veteran-y stuff happening there with Tyler Boyd's return, with Charlie Jones, and with getting back with Joe Burrow and all those things.
And first things first, I think a lot of people were wondering where Tyler Boyd was, and he had never missed voluntary workouts and during the offseason, and certainly not in recent years. And so some wondered, is he disgruntled? Is he bothered? Actually, it's as simple as, and he described it as family time, but it sounds like he was supporting his daughter as she went through some different dance competitions, and I'm sure there was some travel associated with that. And you look at it, and it's like, yeah, probably not going to be able to fit that in with all the voluntary stuff that the Bengals had. So he looked good. He looked like he was in shape. I was certainly excited talking to him in the locker room after practice to be back. He couldn't help but smile. And there were multiple times where I just think he was smiling as he was answering, just because he was happy to be back and happy to be in that locker room. And it's a fun place where a lot of these guys are happy to be there. So I think he was certainly one of them. And you're right. He met Charlie Jones for the first time, was asked about Charlie Jones and his contract and all of those things, which we can dive into. But Tyler Boyd was back, and he was never unhappy in Cincinnati or anything like that. It just had to do with some family time.
Was that a thing? Was that something that people were speculating about?
It was about to start being a thing. I've had multiple people tweet me, little things like, why isn't Boyd here? I know we've had some comments on YouTube. I don't think it was that big, because most people understood, like Trey Hendrickson missed voluntary last year. Some guys just miss. It's okay.
Yeah.
Things come up. And especially Tyler at this stage of his life, where he's not 21, 22 anymore. Like he has a daughter, and he has a family and stuff. I get it. Soak up as much family time as possible. And he looked good, by the way. Got plenty of passes from Joe Burrow. I think he's in good shape. I think he's ready to go.
Yeah, there were a few themes, one of which was the camaraderie of the locker room that came through in Zac Taylor's presser when he was talking about Tyler Boyd, when he was talking about what he's looking for in these offseason optional practices. Something that Tyler Boyd talked about as far as, why he came back, as he was asked about it. Part of it was he wanted to be with his guys. He talked a lot about, love the family time, love spending time with his family, but wanted to get back with his teammates. And that's the kind of teammate that Tyler Boyd has been. That's the kind of guy that Boyd has been under the Zac Taylor coaching regime entirely, really. And Taylor talked about that when he was talking about Boyd and why he sent him out for the playoff coin toss and all those things. As another example, one of those guys doing everything the right way, was asked about, Boyd's influence on Jamar Chase and T. Higgins coming into the league. And when he was asked about Charlie Jones and the contract situation, I thought he handled it well. He's not really looking ahead for another extension, or at least didn't talk about it, and gave the warning or the caveat that was like, yeah, I might not be here forever, but right now I'm a Cincinnati Bengal. I'll always be a Cincinnati Bengal, and my job is to help this team be better, and that will include Charlie Jones being part of that latest receiver addition that Tyler Boyd will play a part in mentoring.
There's everyone can benefit from Tyler Boyd playing well this year. And I think that's as simple as it can be. Yeah, he's in a contract year. This might be his last year as a Bengal. Charlie Jones might also stink at football or get hurt or 8 other things happen. And I'm not wishing injury on anyone, but there's a lot of things that could happen where the Bengals look at it and say, oh, well, maybe we do keep Tyler, right? The T thing is undetermined. Like there's so many things that could play out. And while it's real easy to say, well, Jones is Boyd's replacement and all of those things, and I get it. I could see the path to that, but that's one of many paths. And I don't think Tyler has let his mind wander too much. And just to go back to his mindset, I remember before he had his breakout season. And so I believe that was 2018 when he really got in the groove and showed what he could be in the NFL. And he ended 2017 well with that walk-off touchdown against the Ravens. But that season in 2017, I remember talking to him and he's like, if I don't shine here, I'm going to shine somewhere. And he's always had that confidence, that mindset. So I just think he assumes, let's go win a ring in Cincinnati. And if they want me back and we can find a deal, that's great. If not, let's bring the Bengals a ring this year. And I'll do what Von Bell and Jesse Bates and Hayden Hurst and all of these guys did this past March, which was get paid. So if he plays well, the Bengals are probably playing well on offense. And that's the other thing that stood out to me, Jake, is he mentioned, we've talked, our everydayers know how big I am on points and getting to 30. And I've set that bar the past 2 years. He asked about his expectations and he mentioned 30, 35, 40, which I love. My bar will still be that 30-point mark because I think you can lead the NFL in scoring if you get there. And that should be the expectation for this offense, is to be the NFL's best offense. But he mentioned that 30-point mark as well. So just want to share that with our listeners.
Good stuff. And of course, back working with Joe Burrow and the rest of these wide receivers. And there are some interesting, noteworthy takeaways that we'll get to in just a minute, talking about, what some of this stuff has looked like, what the Bengals seem to be emphasizing, at least on the offensive side of the ball, where a lot of the clips have been shared on Twitter. We'll get into that coming up next. Last thought for me on Tyler Boyd, just in terms of the contract and everything. One of the great examples of a homegrown player for the Cincinnati Bengals. You're right, broke out in 2018. That was the correct year, just to verify that. Not that anyone had those doubts, but came in young, played through age 29 in Cincinnati at least. We'll see if he gets an extension beyond that, a third contract from this team in his age 30 season. Those would be breaking from the norm. But like you said, James, there's so many things that can happen. We didn't expect Jermaine Pratt to be back this offseason as another example that's kind of similar, where things don't always go according to plan. And sometimes you need to pivot. And this Bengals front office always ready to do that. And is there a pivot coming on offense, James? Or is it just, normal offseason practice work? We'll get into some of the most noteworthy practice observations from Tuesday's practice coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet. If you're looking for a healthy snack that is going to taste great, well, look no farther than Built Bar. Whether you're trying to get a protein punch post-workout, maybe you just want a healthy snack in between meetings, the #1 protein bar on the planet, Built Bar, is for you because it's covered in 100% real dark chocolate, high protein, low sugar, low calories, and amazing flavors. You don't have to sacrifice taste for health. And Built Bar covers both bases. They have a variety of flavors, certain that you're going to find one that you love, maybe multiple like me that you love. So check them out today. at built.com, where they have limited edition flavors and so many for you, or in person at your local Sam's Club or Walmart retailers. Again, Sam's Club, Walmart, or built.com. It's Built Bar, the #1 protein bar on the planet.
Let's dive into some practice observations next, James. And I'm assuming that your practice observation is going to lead off with something related to, I don't know, it couldn't possibly be Joe Burrow and the wide receivers. Are you going to surprise me? Well, what do you got? Let's see what your first observation is. I know what one of the big ones is for me, but I want to know, you were there in person, what the biggest takeaway for you was today.
Well, first things first, having Boyd back, he's the one who leads the wide receiver drills. And so it was cool to see that again, that it's 83 there and not 1 or 5. But so that stood out. Like I said, Boyd looked like he was in good shape. Jamar catching deep balls from Burrow, T. Higgins. But let's get to the main takeaway, because I think it's something you mentioned to me before we started recording, something I noticed last week. I think something that people have noticed if you're paying close attention to the clips that have came out throughout these off-season workouts. So let's get to your takeaway, because I think it is the lead story.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing to me, looking at the clips that have been posted on Twitter by various Bengals media members, including you, James, of course, at practice and doing your video thing, is the amount of play action that continues when the Bengals are repping, Joe Burrow throwing to one guy, Joe Burrow going 7-on-0, 7-on-air. Almost every clip, if not literally every clip, featuring some sort of play action. And there's some other things that, if you really focus on Joe Burrow's footwork, there are a couple other things that I find interesting, but the preponderance of play action stuff, literally every clip I saw today of Joe Burrow throwing a pass was some sort of play action before he threw the pass. And that isn't just today. That's something that you mentioned last week, James. That's been ongoing for pretty much every clip we've seen of this offense so far in this offseason period, where we're getting, limited, work on air, that sort of stuff, not too intense. But could this signal a change in an increased emphasis on play action? Because you're seeing it under center, in shotgun. You're seeing a variety of different play action footwork, play action reps from Joe Burrow. And, 1 or 2 practices here or there, you kind of note it and move on, but this is consistent. And maybe it's just what they're doing on, the media practices, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the
it might just be every Tuesday they work on their play action. Yep.
And it might be as simple as that, or it might be that it's a point of emphasis at this point in the offseason. Yeah.
I think it would be nice if it was a part of the emphasis, just because if there was a hole, if there was something you would look at Joe Burrow and say you want to get more comfortable doing this, it's turning your back to the defense. And I talked about it a little bit last week on the pod. Like, if this offensive line is as good as I expect it to be, hopefully he does get comfortable doing that. I get it when you have the offensive lines that you had in 2020 and 2021, and even last season at times, especially if you're coming off of knee reconstruction surgery or appendicitis, where it was a pretty serious surgery that you had to deal with going into the season. Like, all of those things, there's been a bunch of different factors. But he's so good at so much that's sort of the missing thing of, and not that it's going to be a huge part of their offense, because I don't necessarily think it will be, but shouldn't it be there somewhere where it can potentially have an impact if needed? And the other part of this, they need to find ways to generate more explosive plays. And so finding different ways to utilize play action. I think back to the Chad. How many deep balls did Chad Johnson have from Carson Palmer that were play action in the middle of the field? And that's just something that offense used. And I'm not saying that this is going to be a huge part of what they do, but it could be something. And you're not the first one to notice it. And I haven't asked around. I should have before we started recording. I wonder if it's just Tuesdays they work on play action because it might be that simple. That said, it's been consistent, so it's certainly worth noting.
Do we get Zac again next week?
We don't.
So you get him for mandatory minicamp, though, perhaps?
Yep. Yeah, we'll get him then.
If we see it again next week, OTAs next week, we'll talk about the remainder of the Bengals offseason schedule here in a little bit too, because it's interesting. Maybe we'll get to ask then, or maybe we'll get to ask before then. But on the topic of Joe Burrow and play action and the Bengals in play action, the top of the league last year in terms of play action use was Atlanta with Marcus Mariota, Miami with Tua at 44%, 43% in those offenses. So big play action offense with Arthur Jones in Atlanta, big play action offense in the McVay style, Mike McDaniel offense in Miami. And then the other end of the spectrum is Joe Burrow and Tom Brady at the bottom of the NFL in terms of play action use at 15.5%, roughly equal for both of those guys. But the
Bucs couldn't run the ball at all.
Right.
So that's a big part of it for them. Yeah.
And the other quarterbacks that are similar, Kenny Pickett, Andy Dalton, Joe Flacco with the Jets, Matt Ryan with the Colts. And out of all those guys, the two quarterbacks in that list that are good are Tom Brady and Joe Burrow. So it's a stylistic thing for sure. It could be limitations of personnel to some degree. But like you said, James, there's a few ways in which you would like to see Joe Burrow be better in play action. He was less efficient in terms of completion percentage on play action, which you could see to some extent, but most of the good play action passers in the NFL and the good play action offenses see at least a little bit of a bump in terms of completion percentage, in terms of explosive plays. And you're not necessarily getting that a ton with the Joe Burrow play action game. And so an area where he could perform a little bit better, especially with relation to the under center part of things. And there wasn't as much under center work, but there was a little bit. But a weapon that could be low-hanging fruit for this offense as well, especially when you talk about the middle of the field. And one of those play action reps that you can find a video of on Twitter is a play action shot to the middle of the field of Tyler Boyd on a deep crosser, which I think should be thrilling. Like the idea of getting more deep crossers into this offense is really fun. So we'll see if that happens or not. It could just be a Tuesday thing, like we've said, but I think it is pretty interesting the extent to which the Bengals have appeared to be working on play action stuff in this offseason program.
No doubt. And like I said, hopefully that's something that it's one of the holes in their game. If you want to point out something, one of the flaws, obviously consistency, offensive line, all of those things. But if the offensive line improves, which you expect it to, there should be more wrinkles to help them get to that 30-plus points per game that I expect, that Tyler Boyd expects, that I think Zac Taylor expects. So let's discuss a few other things that Zac Taylor had to say, maybe some more practice takeaways. Jake mentioned the schedule. The Bengals, well, they're going to welcome an opponent to town early in the preseason for more joint practices. We'll see if there's any helmet swinging. We'll discuss that and much more coming up next.
One of the big differences in this year's joint practice should be that there's no Super Bowl history between these teams. The Green Bay Packers will be the team for that joint practice. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. Any other practice takeaways before we dive into the Taylor presser, other comments, and the rest of the Bengals offseason schedule here for the next couple of weeks that you noticed? Jackson Carman continuing to work as the number one right tackle right now with LC still rehabbing and Jonah Williams not there. That was a note. Some special teams work. Any Brad Robbins notes today for me, James? I think I really like Brad Robbins. I'm excited for him.
Yeah, look at you liking the specialist. What a 180.
Yeah,
what a 180. Punters
the
matter
mustache
in
got me,
world
man.
Now. It's probably what it was. No, Look, Jackson Carman, of course, he's de facto right tackle one, right? Lel Collins he did bring his cleats out and was getting a little work in on his own. Nothing like the video that broke social media last week, but at least we didn't see anything like that. But was out there making progress, so we'll see. But no, nothing too too major to take away. It's their walkthrough style type things. It's about the camaraderie as much as anything. But looking at that right tackle spot, we can kind of segue into Jonah Williams. And Zach didn't reveal if he expects Jonah Williams there or not for mandatory minicamp, which starts, in 2 weeks. OTAs are next week. These are right now, it's just kind of workouts, off-season workouts. Organized team activities officially start next week, and then the week after that is mandatory minicamp. I expect to see Jonah Williams for mandatory minicamp. We'll see if it happens.
That would be the time for him to show up. If he's going to do everything that's mandatory, it would be mandatory minicamp, it would be training camp. You saw Jesse Bates miss some of that stuff last year. A bit of a different situation, but similar insofar as, the 1 year left on the deal on an option kind of thing, a franchise tag versus a 5th-year option. A little bit different, but some similarities between those two mechanisms available to the Bengals front office to keep guys under contract for an additional year. Where Jonah probably didn't get the extension he wanted, then he wanted to get traded after Orlando Brown signed with the Bengals and all those things. But that's been the reporting this offseason, right? Is that he was going to do the mandatory things, is what folks expected to who were talking to his camp. And so we'll see if he's there in a couple of weeks. That is the Bengals offseason program finishing up, though, 2 more weeks, and then they get a break before training camp. And Zac Taylor talked about that and talked about, why they're taking the approach they're taking that isn't designed to be anyway incredibly physically taxing. They want to get these guys to June 15th, which was the date Zac Taylor mentioned, which is where that offseason break occurs for coaches and players. Want to get them there as healthy as possible. And so it'll be interesting really to see if Jonah does get back for that mini camp, which if the last few years are any indication, won't be terribly taxing either.
No, it won't. And I do think it's valuable. You can't praise Tyler for being back and saying how good it is and then just dismiss the idea of Jonah missing valuable reps with this team. And right. I think these guys will welcome him back with open arms, much like Jesse last year. They understand the business side of it. And I would be pretty surprised if we don't see Jonah mid-June. So that'll be interesting then, right? Who does line up at right tackle 1? How many reps does he take? Is he on the side? Like, there's a lot there. And so I'm sure there will be about 5,000 people around his locker trying to talk to him. I'll be one of them during those mandatory minicamp practices and open locker rooms before the practice. So that said, the thing I'm kind of excited about last year, the joint practices, you mentioned it a little bit. The joint practices against the Green Bay Packers, Zac Taylor revealed this on Tuesday. 1, not 2. Obviously, all hell broke loose in practice number 2 against the Rams last year. But I can already see the narrative if Jordan Love completes a deep ball to Christian Watson. Oh, man, is it time to worry about the safeties? That said, the Bengals are hosting the Packers for a one-day joint practice on the Wednesday before that first preseason game.
Getting it done early in the preseason, which is, I believe, similar to last year. What was it?
Last year was preseason game number 3. It was number 3.
So not even close. It was the last one last year.
I believe so. I think it was. I'm 95% sure. I might be wrong on that, though.
It was either the first or the last in my head, and I couldn't remember. I'm going to check now. But getting it out of the way early.
Yeah, it was the last.
The third preseason game last year. No training camp frustrations to build up to the point of the boiling point of a joint practice late in the preseason. Perhaps that will help things a little bit, getting it in early as well, because it's not terribly uncommon to see the sort of fracas break out in some of these joint practices around the NFL in the last few years. It feels like there's been a number of scuffles, to say the least. And so hopefully this year they get those valuable reps working against another team a little bit with the joint practice, especially for those first unit guys who, it'll be another year of us asking. And hopefully, again, knock on wood, Joe Burrow getting through a normal offseason where we're asking, is Joe Burrow, are these starters going to play in this preseason, which is a question that we've wondered about the last couple of years where they really haven't done a lot of work in preseason games.
I think they'll get a series or two.
Ooh.
I don't think it's going to be much. I think they'll play a little bit, and that's it, the entire preseason. I don't think the Bengals are going to change their tune at all.
No.
Based on – I don't think they look at last year and the start to the season. It's more Burrow was coming off of that appendectomy. He couldn't have played anyway. Lel was hurt in the preseason. We couldn't play him anyways. And Alex Kappa was coming back. Like, it wasn't, oh, we're fully healthy and ready to go, and we just didn't play any of these guys. They weren't ready.
That's part of it. The guys that were ready also didn't play. Like, there were no starters on offense that played.
You playing
right?
Jamar Chase without Joe Burrow? What's the point?
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair question there. Going through the process, part of it, right? Zac Taylor said it was really interesting. Zac Taylor said the most interesting thing for him to watch in these practices is new guys, new teammates getting in and out of the huddle together, building that camaraderie on the field as well as off the field. And, mentioning specifically Tyler there, Tyler Boyd, the first time they've had all three receivers there. So Tyler Boyd, new receiver in the huddle with a new left tackle, with a new tight end in Irv Smith. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting note from Taylor, something that he's been paying a lot of attention to on the defensive side of the ball too, getting out of the huddle, getting into your call where they're going through that stuff. I thought that was an interesting note from Taylor in his press conference. Anything else, James, from Taylor's presser that you want to mention before we get out of here?
Not really. Chidobe Awuzie progressing like normal. Trying to think if there's anything else. Praised Joe Mixon, said there's a reason they give him that contract, which maybe that's more of a topic than I just hit on, but little notes like that. So, but I just got out of there, an hour ago. So I'm sure there'll be more takeaways that we can hit on later this week, depending on what comes up.
That's right. And we will have you covered for the rest of the week with the NFL going into offseason mode, James. At some point here, just to give the people a little bit of a warning, we might go into offseason mode for a few weeks as well. So stay tuned. We'll get you updated on what the Locked On Bengals schedule will be as the Bengals near that month off or so that we're going to have before training camp. And we'll make sure that we keep you in the loop for when you can expect our episodes. But this week, we'll at least have you covered for the next couple of days as well. So until next time, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.